Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ainsley News, Wednesday, the 6th of October. Today we're talking inflation and the terminal phase of bubble excess. Late last week, we were served up another contemporary reminder of the impacts of abuse of a fiat currency when Venezuela launched its second monetary overhaul in 3 years by cutting 6 zeros from the Bolivian currency in response to hyperinflation. In 2018, they cut 5 zeros and promised single-digit inflation. In the last year, Venezuela have experienced 1,743% inflation. That's 4 digits and not 1. There may be differences between what the Venezuelan government have done compared to, say, the US or China, but the narrative of inflation being transitory is being sorely tested. Doug Noland is a bubble expert, and he's screaming from the hilltop that we are in what he calls the terminal phase of bubble excess. For readers wanting a quick read or listen, we can jump to his following conclusion. With inflation raging and the Republicans breathing down their necks, will the Fed flinch when faltering markets in a raving tantrum demand another quick trillion or two? So many facets of the current environment point to monumental changes in policy, financial and market backdrops. In halcyon days, where the consequences of egregious monetary inflation primarily manifest in surging securities and asset prices, they're drawing to a close. For those with the time to listen a bit further, the following is an excellent summation of where we are, albeit still excerpts from a longer report from the same people. This from them. August personal consumption expenditures, or PCE inflation, rose to 4.3% year on year, the largest gain in 30 years. The S&P CoreLogic National Composite Home Price Index posted a 19.7% year-on-year gain in July, the strongest housing inflation in data back to 1987. Zumpa data showed national apartment or two-bedroom rent inflated 13.1% year-on-year, with Zillow national rental prices rising 11.5%. The Bloomberg Commodities Index ended this week with a year-over-year rise of 44.6%. That's right, we'll say that again. The Bloomberg Commodities Index ended the week with a year-over-year rise of 44.6%. The benchmark United Nations Food Index inflated 33% over the past year. University of Michigan consumer one-year inflation expectations were slightly down from July's high of 4.6%, that's near a 13-year high, and only 0.5% below 40-year highs. Forecasts have September year-on-year consumer price inflation, or CPI, at 5.3%, near the high since 1990. In reference to our Fed Chair Powell's comments a couple of weeks ago that everything was fine before the pandemic, this from them. This is somewhat confounding. If there were no imbalances in the economy, why then did the Fed resume quantitative easing in September 2019, months ahead of the pandemic, with markets near all-time highs and unemployment at 50-year lows? Federal Reserve assets have ballooned 4.678 trillion over the past 2 years. That's 107 weeks, of which about 200 billion occurred prior to the Fed's March 2020 crisis ramp-up. There were clearly worsening fragilities in the market structure. It's a key analytical point that the return of QE was in response to market imbalances, most notably instability in the repo market, which had clear potential to erupt as a catalyst to prick US and global bubbles. Recall also that US repo market disorder followed on the heels of Chinese money market instability. Re-energized US, Chinese, and global bubbles could not have been more vulnerable heading into the pandemic. Their near implosions unleashed global monetary stimulus without precedent. In reference to China's PBOC chair Yi Gang's comments last week that China will resist more QE as it's damaging, he stated this: I agree with Governor Yi's astute assessment that QE will damage market functions, monetize fiscal deficits, harm central banks' reputation, blur the boundary of monetary policy, and create moral hazard. As for China, will extend the time for implementing normal monetary policy as much as possible, and there is no need for asset purchases. It has me wondering or pondering whether the PBOC fully comprehends the scope of the crisis that they face. Ironically, that same day we learned they injected $100 billion in response to the Evergrande debacle. The PBOC injected over $100 billion into China's financial system in 9 days. This no doubt helps stabilize Chinese security markets, including the increasingly unstable corporate debt market. It also hints at the scope of Chinese QE that will be forthcoming as de-risking and de-leveraging gains momentum and that China's bubble collapse accelerates. China or global bond markets have every reason to take notice. After all, the risk of a deflationary Chinese bubble collapse has helped underpin bond prices in the face of unending massive supply and mounting inflationary pressures. But suddenly an even greater risk has begun to surface. An increasingly disorderly bubble collapse could force Beijing into aggressive money inflation or monetary inflation, even as China and the world are in the throes of an inflationary shock. China's producer price index was up 9.5% year on year in August, the high all the way back to 1995, when the Chinese economy and credit system had minimal global impact. The nation's energy crisis now has the potential to prolong what was expected to be a temporary inflationary spike. China will aggressively compete with Europe and others for stretched global energy supplies heading into winter, which is their heating season. Already pressured by acute worldwide supply chain issues, global inflationary pressures will be bolstered by surging energy and related commodities prices, as well as from rising prices for Chinese goods. It's beginning to sink in that rising inflation is much more than a transitory phenomenon. Persistent supply shocks and inflationary pressures are altering perceptions, attitudes, and behaviours. Would panicked drivers have drained UK gas stations dry before the pandemic? Will businesses, large and small, manage resources, i.e. materials, inventory, and labour, differently after confronting prolonged supply chain and labour shortage nightmares? Will spiking prices for so many things force governments, businesses, and consumers to change purchasing habits? And in the latest indication of altered psychology, plastered across the news was the latest clue on hoarding behaviour. Costco brings back purchase limits on toilet paper, cleaning supplies, and more. This from Powell. I've never seen these kinds of supply chain issues, never seen an economy that combines drastic labour shortages with lots of unemployed people. Well, never have we seen the Fed print 4.7 trillion in 2 years. Never have we seen such concerted global monetary inflation from US, China, Europe, and the developing economies. Expanding at a blistering terminal phase of bubble excess, 23% annualized rate, China ended Q2 with a debt to GDP ratio of 329%, led by the non-financial corporate sector of 158%. The US ended Q2 with a debt to global or GDP ratio of 367%, with global debt at 353%. Rather than moderating back towards the Fed's 2% target, inflationary pressures are broadening and accelerating. Energy, commodities, housing, and food, most conspicuously. Higher inflation is in the process of being sustained, and it should today be a serious concern, yet few believe the Fed will actually use their tools to suppress it. To begin with, inflation dynamics are not under the Fed's controls. More today than ever before, inflation is a global phenomenon. What's more, a strong case can be made that China has supplanted the US's traditional commanding role in global inflationary dynamics. The eminent market and economic analyst Mohammed Al-Erian has been at the top of his game. His Friday Bloomberg piece is spot on. Demand is not the economy's problem. Supply is. Policymakers and central bankers are stuck in a mindset from the last crisis and need to alter their thinking. And appearing Friday morning on Bloomberg TV, Mr. Al-Erian made an astute observation. When it comes to an orderly taper, the window is closing. We're still buying $120 billion of assets every single month. What have we been buying since the worst of the COVID crisis? Does it make sense at this environment when demand isn't a problem, when bond markets are wide open? It makes no sense. From my analytical perspective, the window has closed. Bubble fragilities preclude an orderly taper. What's more, our focus on the Fed is too narrow. The window to a tapering of global monetary inflation is at this point likely shut as well. Whether they realise it yet or not, the PBOC has likely commenced what will prove to be massive ongoing liquidity injections. I'm also sceptical that the Fed, ECB, Bank of Japan and the Bank of England will have the gumption to wind down their QE programs. China is providing an early glimpse on the serious predicament about to envelop the world. Liquidity injections necessary to keep bubbles from imploding will come concurrently, with problematic supply shocks, acute economic imbalances, and destabilizing price pressures. At the end of the day, I don't see the two goals in tension being price stability versus full employment. The unfolding conflict is poised to match general price stability against market stability. If the Fed and others are, in the ninth inning, determined to sustain securities and asset price bubbles, the world faces the prospect of momentous monetary disorder and inflationary mayhem. Great insight there today. If you made it through all of that detail at the end, congratulations. It was pretty intense, but some pretty good stuff in there. And if you're listening and are a regular listener, we've been keeping an eye on this inflationary topic for quite a while. It seems to be coming at a bit of a head at the moment. Remember, jump over to ainsleyBullion.com.au for all things physical, gold, silver, and platinum. ainsleywealth.com.au for all things cryptocurrency. Bitcoin's just jumped up again, seems to be consolidating its growth. Maybe it's ready to shoot up to that 100 grand that everyone's been talking about. And jump over to goldsilverstandard.com if you haven't looked into it yet. That's our own crypto, built and backed by real gold and silver, stored at Reserve Vault. Enjoy your Wednesday, everyone. We'll catch you tomorrow for more news.